Alright guys, so today we're going to be going over turbochargers. Turbocharger is basically a hot air pump. It helps the engine generate power more efficiently, improves performance, reduces fuel consumption, cuts emissions. We all know cutting emissions is a big one in today's world. Turbos are comprised of turbine housing, turbine wheel, center section. The center section houses the bearings. It's kind of hard to see, but I'll take one apart here in a second and you'll see it. In this particular case, it also houses the variable geometry, the sliding ring for the variable geometry aspect of the turbo. We'll discuss that more in class. The turbine wheel is connected via a shaft that runs through the bearings in the center section to a compressor wheel, and then this is the compressor housing. Basically, as the engine is running, it produces exhaust gas, which is otherwise a wasted form of energy. The turbo utilizes that form of energy in the form of heat anyway, and it directs the heat and the exhaust gas in through the turbine housing, around through, spins the turbine wheel, and comes out the outlet. This turbine wheel then spins this compressor wheel, which pulls air in and runs it through the housing, compresses it, and then runs it usually up to a charge air cooler, sometimes straight to the intake manifold. How fast the turbos spin and how much boost they produce is based on the load and speed of the engine. And again, we can change that now because we have things like variable geometry turbos. You guys are going to tear apart a turbo this week. That's the reason we're doing this video. This is a brief rundown. I've got a turbo here ready to tear apart. Mind you, I've got mine set up and already kind of pre-torn down. This is just the basics. I want you guys to understand that when you're tearing down, no hammers are needed, maybe a rubber mallet or a light dead blow. Do not put these in the vise. These compressor housings are usually made out of aluminum, sometimes stainless steel. You can crush them. The big one, the nut that holds the compressor wheel onto the shaft, is usually a reverse thread. So if you're trying to loosen it and it seems like it's only getting tighter, it's probably because it is. So anyway, we'll dig into here. The first thing you want to do is break the nut on the compressor wheel side loose. You don't need to remove it all the way, but break it loose. Once it's broken loose, you'll want to take a paint pen and mark the clamps and the turbine housing and the compressor housing so that when you put it all back together, it's clocked appropriately. Once it's been clocked, you can go ahead and remove the clamps, pull your compressor housing off, and you'll be left with your compressor wheel and the back plate. You can go ahead and finish pulling your nut off for your compressor wheel. Your compressor wheel will slide off. Sometimes you have a back plate that is removable. Sometimes it is a part of the bearing section. This one's removable. So you can go ahead and pull the bolts out and remove that. At this point, we're into the bearings. And this is the center section. Again, guys, I've already kind of torn down. So what we can do here is pull this part of the bearing off. And sometimes there's smaller pieces than what you think, so make sure you're keeping track of everything. And then we'll pull the bearing section out. And you can see there we're left with the turbine housing. The turbine wheel and the bearing section came out as one. So when I pull the turbine wheel out, I noticed that it pulled one of the bearings out with it, so I've got to be careful about that. That's all the bearing is, guys, a little brass bushing. These things rely on hydrodynamic suspension to balance out. You'll notice when they're dry, they have a little bit of end play to them, free play. That's totally fine when they're dry, but usually in the real world, when you're putting them back together, you're going to want to put oil all over these things and make sure they're well lubricated. That's about what you're looking for. There was no hammers needed for tearing this one apart. There's no vise, no hammers, no anything. If I see any of that stuff, you guys will be going home. I want you to get a good feel for how these work and a good understanding for how they're pumping air and helping to create the engine's efficiency. I hope this video helps, and we'll see you guys in class.